Australia, the land where people say everything is out to kill you. Really? Everything. Do you think this could kill you? Or this? This? In our final Australian Into the Wild today, we're going to be talking about the last batch of Australian reptiles that I have and I use in my education programs. And in the past, in previous videos, we've gone over like all of my carpet pythons, my bearded dragons, my black-headed python, some pretty famous Australian reptiles. Today though, the reptiles we're talking about aren't just found on mainland Australia, they're also found on a really large island just north of Australia called Papua New Guinea. And this whole area, the reptiles found from this area, we usually call them Australasian because they'll have like the typical mainland species, but they'll also have species or subspecies or localities found on these islands in and around Papua New Guinea. Reptiles like the green tree python, which we went over in the part 2 video to this series. Papua New Guinea and the smaller islands around it are very humid, tropical, rainforesty areas. There's also some pretty high elevations to it. It's very much like northern Australia. And there's actually some pretty rare reptiles from this area that we've gone over previously that are pretty expensive in captivity, like the Boland's python and the crocodile monitor. On the flip side of that though, for a lot of the reptiles, especially the ones we're talking about today, if they have species or localities found in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia and also on mainland Australia, the Indonesian ones are going to usually be much cheaper than the Australian ones. And this is because Australia has very strict export laws. Really no new animals have been exported out of the country in a very long time, decades even. So it's a lot easier to find and export and import their Indonesian or Papua New Guinea kind of counterparts rather than the Australian ones. So the first reptile we're talking about today is actually my most recent addition. This is Ophelia, and she is a spotted python, and she is a full-size adult. This is actually one of the smallest python species on the planet. This species maxes out at 4.5 feet maybe for an adult. And the genus that she's from, Antaresia, they actually have the smallest python on the planet in it. It's called the anthill python, which gets even much smaller than this one. Now this species is often confused with the children's python, a very similarly looking python in the same genus actually. It's also in Antaresia. But this snake, it usually gets a little bit skinnier than the children's python and also has a much different patterning. These snakes have kind of a beige crocodile hunter khaki color scheme with these dark blotches going down the body. They're found on the northern half of Australia's east coast, right up through into the islands above Queensland, along with a very, very small range on the southern, very southernmost tip of Papua New Guinea. Despite being found mostly in the tropics, the snake really actually likes to hang out in dry woodlands and rocky riverbanks and cave type areas because that is where its favorite food likes to live. This snake is not your typical mammal eating constrictor, whereas most pythons will eat things like rodents and rabbits, and in Australia you'll eat a lot of possums and stuff. This snake doesn't really go for much of that. What this snake does is it'll hang out at the entrance to these big caves where hundreds of thousands of bats will go into nests, and it'll wait on the edge of this entrance, and as bats come flying out, it'll try and nab one as they go. Ophelia is actually the second reptile I've gotten off Fauna Classifieds, the first being Sky, my diamond python. Most of my animals come to me from, they're either surrenders or given to me or they're found or even off local Craigslist. I don't really buy many animals online, but I got her from a breeder down in southern US, and this wasn't actually one of his breeding snakes. He was just kind of downsizing. She's been absolutely amazing. She's gorgeous. She's super friendly. I wish spotted pythons were more common in captivity, but she's already gone to a few programs because she's just that relaxed. Next up is a snake I've shown off a few times on the channel already. This is Bakari, my northern white-lipped python, who is not intent on showing his face, it seems. And it is hands down one of my most gorgeous snakes. These guys are absolutely beautiful, and they're kind of unique because unlike just about all the reptiles we've talked about in this series so far, this one you won't find on mainland Australia. They are only found on the island of Papua New Guinea. Like the water python or the olive python, this is one of the few snakes out there that truly has no pattern. Now it does have a gradient of coloration going from this very, very kind of brownish golden all the way down to a very light yellow and then their white belly. So there's a very gorgeous gradient there, but there's no actual patterning. And then they have, if I can get him to show it off, is this jet black stunning head head and these white and black dappled lips, which is where they get their name. And that black head is very good at absorbing heat, and it is just an absolutely gorgeous snake. They're a good sized medium snake. They get 6 to 7 feet long, and they're only found on the northern half of this island. Now, the southern white-lipped python, which is very similar to this one, except they don't have this coloration. Their coloration is much more like olive, my brown water python, where it's almost a uniform gray. They also get larger. They get up to 10 feet for some of the biggest ones. Those ones are going to be found on the southern half of Papua New Guinea. This snake is also beautifully iridescent under sunlight thanks to these nanostructures in their scales called iridophores that refract light in a really unique way, making them look kind of like rainbow snakes in the sunlight. They're mostly a terrestrial snake, which is fairly unusual for a snake with this body shape and how much muscle this snake has, especially as I'm feeling it on my arm right now. But they are very good climbers. They eat the kind of typical python things, a lot of mammals, rodents, things like that. Occasional bird or lizard maybe if they happen upon it. Bakari was not a rescue. I did purchase it at an expo because white-lipped pythons really aren't one that I'm going to get in through the door as someone surrendering it to me for free like boa constrictors, ball pythons, corn snakes often do. So I did buy this one, but it was just such a gorgeous snake, and I actually took it out and handled it at the expo and watched kids handle it, so I just knew it was going to be really good for what I do. And Bakari is a huge hit at shows. Kids absolutely love how stunning he is. And so, yeah, so I got him at an expo. I don't think he was wild caught. I think they said he was farm hatched or something, but it's not a captive bred snake. But despite that, and I usually try to avoid buying those, but despite that, he is adjusted very, very well, no problems eating, and he is just absolutely great at programs. The frilled dragon, or frilled neck lizard as it's called in Australia usually, is one of Australia's most famous kind of bizarre reptiles because they have this huge frill that they'll fan out when they get scared by a predator, and it's just they'll flare it out and they'll say, hey, I'm bigger than I look, don't mess with me, and then proceed to immediately turn around and run away. Hello. Hi. Frillies are a textbook example of what I was talking about back in the beginning with having different populations on both Australia and Indonesia. Now, despite that, they are the same species. Your Aussie and Indonesian frilled dragons are the same exact species, but there are some differences. The Aussie dragons tend to be much darker in coloration, whereas the Indonesian ones, you get a lot more broken up kind of gray and white and tannish coloration that helps them camouflage really well on bark. And also, the Aussie ones tend to get bigger. Now, an Aussie male, like a big adult frilled dragon, can get over 3 feet tail to nose tip. But on the opposite side, Indonesians, the males are usually lucky if they hit 2 feet. So of the 4 kind of possibilities, male, female, Indonesian, Australian, Delilah here is the smallest because she's a female Indonesian. And in the wild, frilled dragons are found almost in like a perfect curve right across northern Australia and then southern New Guinea. They are mostly an arboreal lizard, hanging out up in the trees and on branches and blending into their bark, and they have a wide diet of bugs ranging from cicadas, grasshoppers, butterflies and moths and their larvae, termites, and then sometimes they'll even eat other smaller lizards. Delilah here I got as a little baby at an expo a couple years ago that was like an hour and a half away from me, and she was actually so relaxed from when I got her. Hello, I keep afraid that she's gonna jump onto my face. But when I got her, she actually just rode the entire way home on my shoulder. I wasn't driving, so she just hung out on my shoulder. Even now I could take her out and she'll hang out on me somewhat pretty well every once in a while. Like if the parrot makes a noise or my dog moves, she might like kind of jump off and try to run around on the floor. But even now you can see she's just kind of hanging out on her bark and just looking at me. Now she hates going to shows though. She's never really gone to programs. I brought her to a couple, but it just stresses her out like crazy. So she's kind of more of a personal pet for me, not so much an education animal, but now that I have a YouTube channel, I can educate people with her from the comfort of my living room and she doesn't have to get stressed out. The Indonesian frilled dragons are going to be much cheaper and easier to find than the Aussie frilled dragons. I think all the expos I've ever gone to, I've only seen maybe 2 Aussie frills for sale, and they were very expensive. So if you want a frilled dragon, unless you're going to save up a lot of money, you're most likely going to end up with a frilly that's from Indonesia. And now for my last Australian reptile that I'm going to talk about, we have what is probably just behind the bearded dragon as Australia's most famous lizard, and that is the blue-tongued skink, or blue-tongued lizard as they're called in Australia. There's 8 species of these guys. They are a kind of weird-looking animal. They have this kind of chubby, elongated, sausage-like body with these little legs. And just like the frilled dragon had its big frill for a display, this guy has that big blue tongue that'll fan out and he'll try and startle predators to not want them to eat him, while he, again, does the same thing the frilly does, and he'll turn around immediately and try to run away, except he's not as fast at it. because he's got the little legs. I went more into what makes the blue-tongued skink such a bizarre reptile, actually in our first ever video on the channel last year. Unlike the frilled dragon though, where they were the same species on Australia and on Papua New Guinea, these guys though, they're actual different species. Like I said, there's 8 species of blue tongue. So on mainland Australia, you've got your eastern blue tongues, blotched, northern, even the shingleback skink is technically a blue tongue skink species. And then you've got 2 in Indonesia. You've got the Irian Jaya blue tongue skink, and then the actual outright Indonesian blue tongue skink, which I believe is what Lou is. Lou is, I think, a Maruki blue tongue skink. I'm not 100% sure. If you've watched most of my videos, you can tell I'm not really good when it comes to IDing morphs or localities. So I think it's a Maruki. I'm not 100% sure. The Indonesian blue tongue skink tends to have a much kind of darker coloring and patterning than their Australian counterparts. They can have whites, tans, they can have blacks, browns, even oranges on some species. Obviously this is not an arboreal lizard with this shape, but their homes kind of range from desert grasslands up to tropical rainforests, which the Indonesians usually are found in. All blueies are omnivores, so they're going to be eating fruits, plant material. They're going to eat a lot, very heavy on the invertebrates, roaches, grasshoppers, worms, grubs, snails, and then they'll also sometimes eat very small vertebrate prey, like very small mice if they happen upon them. Big Lou was actually given to me by someone that saw me at a program and thought he would be perfect for what I do. He just had too many pets, so he was just looking to kind of downsize. So he just gave me Big Lou in his enclosure, and Big Lou has been a huge hit at my program since. Kids love watching him kind of slither and waddle along the ground. They love seeing his big blue tongue stick out. He's just a very non-threatening reptile, which is like the perfect definition for a blue-tongued skink. So those were the last Australian reptiles that I use in my programs. And Delilah got fed up of her bark, so she ran up on top of my head, because that's what they like to do. They like being high up. So she's gonna chill out up there. Like the video if you learned something. Hopefully you like seeing some of my kind of cool Aussie reptiles over the last 3 Australian Into the Wild videos. We're gonna be doing a new set of those this year for Africa. We're gonna talk about some of my African animals, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you later.